Hi, this presentation is going to be an in-depth dive into the Schema.org Blueprints module for Drupal. My name is Jake Rockowitz. I want to make your life easier by solving complex problems with simple, well-thought-out solutions. You can find me at jrockowitz on the web and on Drupal.org and jrockowitz.com. And I want to do this statement to level set what is the Schema.org Blueprint module. Well, it provides perfect data structures, pristine APIs, and great SEO. And this whole presentation is going to explain those three key things that it accomplishes and challenges that every website faces. I want to start off with some background. And I've been thinking about this module for 3 years. And I've written about what would a schema first approach be, where you start, what's your data structures, and you start building your site and everyone's on the same page, to what if you use schema.org as that data structure that's where you start. And finally, just kind of thinking about what are the future of our APIs, UIs, and user experiences in the Drupal community. And for me, schema.org is another way for us to get off our individual content model and API islands. In other words, I feel like each site we're building has its own data structure, its own way of defining an event, an own way for a blog post. And that's creating little islands. Each website's its own little data island. Meanwhile, that doesn't have to be the case. We could all have data that could be shared across multiple sites, and we're all speaking the same language. And schema.org, which is what we're leading to, is this idea that we need a common language to describe things. And you kind of get it, schema.org, let's start with the definition. Schema.org is a collaborative community activity with a mission to create and maintain and promote schemas for structured data on the internet, on web pages and email messages and beyond. It's a collaboration between Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Yandex to define things on the web so that their search engines can understand the information that every website is offering. And you see this in action on Google when you do a search and there's a perfect sidebar describing the information you're looking for. And in line, there's questions that people have answered. All of that is pulled from schema, written across the web on many sites. Over 10 million sites are using schema.org to mark up their web pages and email messages. And schemas are a set of types, each associated with a set of properties, and the types are arranged in a hierarchy. Types are the same as entity types. There's about 800. There's 1,500 properties that corresponds to fields in Drupal. Data types people are familiar with. And enumerations, frankly, they're like taxonomy terms, like a set of things. The best one that you might see in this demo is a gender type, has male and female. And they get more and more complex as you need. In schema.org, you can go to the website and browse. What you're seeing here is just the hierarchy. I'm going to go to an event and list out all the recommended properties with data types and descriptions for each one of these. What's the intended data? And since events are so popular, they list out subtypes for that event. And here is an example of the JSON LD a site might include in their markup to publish that event across the web. So what is a schema.org first approach? A schema.org first approach leverages schema.org as the foundation for building content models using structured data, which is API first, standardized, and universal. This makes it easier for organizations to author and distribute content to multiple channels. So we're going to use schema from the get-go, and that's what's going to be how we do things. Everyone will understand it because they'll look at your APIs and it matches a spec that they've looked at for 10 years. Drupal's current approach is to do schema.org last. And this is no dig at the meta tag, the schema.org meta tag module, but the idea is you build your site, your island, and then to make people have access to your island of data, you start laying schema.org on top of it. So the properties are kind of hard-coded using token replacements. This is an example of the UI where you're navigating to an event example and you get down to the schema.org properties and you have to go and define it. And when you edit it, it's actually pretty hard to set up and challenging because you're taking existing data and kind of squashing it in to meet this spec. And the question, what if the existing data was this? So that is the schema.org Blueprints module. The schema.org Blueprints module takes a schema.org first approach to building content models and structured data in Drupal. So it's going to be broken down in some smaller modules. There's a core module that starts to understand schema.org. It imports the schema into Drupal. It creates 2 tables of types and properties. It sets up some APIs. It also sets up configurable entities for mapping schema.org types to Drupal entity types. And secondly, there's these 2 modules, a report module, which actually shows what you kind of saw in schema.org in Drupal, browsing these types and properties and even the naming conventions. I'll get into that in a little bit. But the idea is it really demonstrates that in Drupal, we understand schema.org. And then the UI is taking all this information and applying it. It allows administrators to associate schema.org types and properties with fieldable entity types. You're creating nodes that are schema.org events. And the goal of my next demo is to build out a website's base content types and information to architecture in 5 minutes instead of a few hours. I want to demo how much this can accelerate the process, and I'm just using a small example. I'm going to set a brief timer, but I'm going to take a pause during it, and you'll see. I'm going to start a demo. Let me breathe deep and go through. This is the Gin admin theme. I just like it. It's very clean. We're going to log in. This is a plain vanilla Drupal site with no changes whatsoever, except for these modules being enabled. So let's start. And I'm going to go really slow, and then I'll show you where the timer starts clicking. It's about creating these content types. But you get this report about schema.org. In the report, I'm going to walk through. We pull in the copy because it's a good starting point. You have an ability to quickly search. If I type a recipe, if I select it, it'll jump right to it. And I'm just pulling the types that schema.org for now are recommending. And I have been tracking some documentation around the web, so I'm including it here. It's better just to dive into types. This is a table of all the types, so you could do filtering and get to it. Or you can click on the hierarchy. So we could see thing has events, and there's common ones. I think you see there's ones that make sense to you immediately and other ones that are like, wow, that I need to understand what biochem entity is. But what you do understand is there's an event, there's a person, there's a place. An organization, I'll slide it out because you get the concept that it's just a grouping mechanism. So you have an organization, a group of people, and it goes down. And then if you were talking about businesses, you get to local business. Moving on, I did take the liberty to break these down a little further because I wanted to call out intangibles. Intangibles are small sub-entity type, sub-schema.org types that are used to build bigger things. The one I'm probably going to demo is a contact type. But you could see if you're building a hotel, you could have bed details. We're going to get into looking at them in a second. Enumerations, that was the list of things I talked about. I'm going to expand them and scroll, and you'll see, book format, what type of book, if you're building a book site. Last thing is these are structured data values. These are concrete pieces of data. And the contact point is the one I'm going to walk through. It's about contacting someone, or a geoshape or pricing specification. If we were building recipes, we would need to look at nutrition information. I'm going to use that. I'm going to roll with it. I'm going to click on it, and we get in, and now we get to learn about nutrition information. We understand where it is. And this is schema.org stuff. This is just pulled in, cleaned up a little bit, kind of more Drupal specific. But the idea is we just want to understand the data. At the bottom, I'm listing what are the default types if I created this that are going to be configured? What are all the types available? Where it's included? Where it appears in? So if I wanted to create a recipe, I'd need to, and this is a good way to context what you're going to see. If I want to create a recipe, I should create a nutrition schema.org type first because recipes rely on nutritional information if you're doing that level of detail. That sets up a lot of stuff that I'm about to show you. So properties, just a list of all the properties. You can navigate these many different ways. Names, can't spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to emphasize that schema.org has one naming convention and Drupal has another. And this is basically showing how we're mapping schema.org to Drupal. The biggest constraint is Drupal limits field names to 32 characters. Schema.org has no limitation. So if I go to the abbreviated names tab, you're going to see all the names from schema.org that are brought into Drupal where they're limiting the number of characters. Sometimes I'm applying, there's a whole algorithm here where you might apply a prefix or a suffix to all names, like body measurement. Even though this would fit in 32 characters, what if there's a more complex one that extends, like this one is hitting a 27 character limit, it's going to be a problem if you add a prefix to it. So we abbreviate it. I don't love abbreviations, but this is a controlled mechanism to do it. You actually have control over the algorithm. You can pick all the mechanisms, and the goal is just to get a standard way to move over. References, what I am trying to do is track things in schema.org. This was the about you saw in the beginning. If you go to a schema.org type and you're interested in learning more, like if you were building a hotel, you can get references to how to build out a hotel using schema.org. And I plan to extend this a lot more in the future. I have a pipe dream of recording videos for different types and how we would leverage that in Drupal. Wow, I've spent more time than 5 minutes on this, so I want to get to building the site. So we're going to switch gears. We're in a report, and I've decided this demo goes on as long as I need. I don't want to miss anything. So let's start with, we need to create a subcomponent to get this demo to start rolling. I'm going to create a contact point. And I'm going to emphasize that I'm in paragraphs, and I'm slowing down here for everyone's sake. I've got no paragraphs. I could create a normal paragraph, or I could say I want to add a schema.org. So what this is doing is, first it says, what type of paragraph do you want to create? This is all under your control, but what I'm trying to do is capture common patterns. And the first one is contact point. Anything related to contact, a place, an organization, a person. How do you contact them? So what you're seeing here is the entity type creation form first, automatically filled out because we have information. We know it's a contact point. We know we can create a machine name that makes a lot of sense. Interestingly enough, I'll get to the description. It's blank because it's going to be automatically populated because I have a schema.org description module enabled. If you didn't, it'd pull the description from schema.org and you could customize it right now. I'll come back to subtyping in the appropriate moment, but you have the ability to go and see. So right now it's showing mapped properties. So these are the three, and I'm going to slow down and then come back. These are the three properties that will be created, or fields, when I hit submit below. This is automatically mapped off an algorithm. The first one, I'm just going to walk into some in-depth detail. There's a contact type. I can click on it and get more information if the report module is enabled and understand it a little better. This is the data type. It's text. So it's smart and figures out that we need to do text. And here's where you're seeing a field storage creation form inline with a description. You could set it to unlimited values. There's actual reasonable defaults. Everything you're seeing, technically nothing needs to change here. I'm just trying to show you. We also have a drop down of all the fields that are possible that you might use. We have no existing fields, and these are the base fields that I felt might be something we map to schema.org. It really depends. Paragraphs, it's a little edge casey why you would map a UUID, but maybe. For now, I'm going to keep going. Email, note how it was text, but I converted it to an email. Phone number, the same thing. This is safe to hit save. So I'm creating an organization. Now I know I can have a contact type. Everything has images, and I have media turned on. And media has an image media type. Now, what needs to happen is I'm going to go into Manage Fields, and you get this schema.org tab in the Field UI. I need to go here, and it says at the top, we're mapping media type image to schema.org type image object. And we're telling the system that here's an image object to work with. And once again, you see the same form, but you notice I didn't bring the color coding up. I'm trying to slow down for you. It's green because it's finding existing fields, and I've said map date created to the authored on, map date modified to the change date. There is an image associated with media types, therefore I'm going to use it. Name maps to the name. These are all fields that come with media types. We don't have to do much more than hit save. And what we've succeeded in doing right now is to tell all our other entity types, when you start creating schema.org type and there's an image, come here for the image, associate with this image object. Now we're going to get into the fun part. And this is where I would say you need to time me. It's not, I'm walking through a lot. We're going to sit here and create a base site. And all starts you start with place, because you can't have a person unless they have a place to live. That's like a common relationship. And this is a challenge for content architects, what comes first. But I've figured out for the demo, place, organization, person, event makes the most sense. You can't have events without people and organizations and a place for it to happen. So we're going to start. And I'm going to stop on the ones that have something unique. I'm going to close this. But you see it starts mapping. Oh, and I didn't show you this. If I click Show Unmapped, here's all the properties available. It's massive. As a content architect, you need to understand these things. If you feel like you need to make a tweak, an initial type, you can set up an alternate name for this place. And all you would do is you'd go add field. Keep in mind that's all you need to do to get an alternate name. And I will do that for the demo. I'm very comfortable with that. You'll notice there's a lot of detail. Amenity features for a place. Well, it makes sense if a place starts to become a business or a branch code. These are universal properties, but you'll see as I'm going through it, I don't want to use too many of them, especially at high levels in schema.org. I'm going to hit save. We've got place. I'm going to go to organization. Organization is going to be I'm going to do hide map to show you what's happening. Address, you see contact point kicking in. Mapping to paragraph. Knowing it's unlimited. Makes sense. Multiple contact points. Multiple phone numbers or email addresses. And then there is probably a primary email address and a primary phone number. And there's an image. You see and it's reused. Now it starts reusing the fields. And this is a good opportunity. I'm pointing at it right now. Is the fields are prefixed with schema underscore to kind of distinguish this data. You have control over that. I felt it was a good pattern to say, here's your schema data, here's your field. Fields start to become custom data, in quotes, even though you can't see me. And schema is real data that you want to share. Let's keep going. I definitely am taking more than 5 minutes, but you start to see that I'm clicking buttons. That's it. Now for person, what's nice is person is a very high level schema.org type with not a lot of additional specificity that you can have. The only subtype, and that's we're going to get here in a second, is you could say they might be a patient. And that's it. So that's why a lot of properties out of the box will be mapped. It makes sense to say, I want additional name, and I want to show you something about additional name. It can be used for the middle name. I feel most people are going to start from this perspective of English, US. There's code to instead of using additional name, it uses middle name. Of course, in the back end, you want to keep it as additional name. It doesn't really make sense to do middle name. I just want to throw out there, you could change it to middle name in your back end, but then in your APIs, still call it additional name. You see address. That means it's picking up. I had created a schema address, awards, unlimited number of awards, simple plain text. I'm going to keep going. Gender, it says taxonomy term. I'll have to show it to you when it gets created, but what it's doing is mapping to the gender type enumeration. I don't have time to show this to you, but basically I'm taking all those enumerations and creating a taxonomy in Drupal. The reason to do that is it opens up, you have full control over it. You can disable enumerations, you can add to it, and you can translate it. So you have full control over that enumeration in Drupal. I'm going to keep going. No, there's a lot of, I have to keep going because I want to show you so much. I can't emphasize, it takes a second. I have a ridiculously fast machine, but you could see at this message, I've created a content type with almost a dozen fields, and under the hood, which you'll see in a moment, I've mapped to RDF, and I've created a JSON API all in one click. Let's keep going. And I think I actually, if you say, what was he clicking for 5 minutes, I'm definitely under that window. Now we have an opportunity to talk about subtyping. Events on schema.org, basically if we pull out the subtypes, there's a whole series of lower level, not much lower level subtypes. And the idea here is, and when you get to business event, there are no extra properties to business event. The type is the only thing that adds an additional level of specificity to an event. So you don't really need to create all these event types on your site. It doesn't actually make sense, but that's why, and you have control over this, by default, subtyping is enabled. So you create an event, and you get a drop down, and you say, I would like to make this more specific. I'm going to keep going. You're going to see events. We haven't really talked about dates. Dates are automatically mapped to date fields. Event status, that is an enumeration. If I click here, you're going to get a preview. There's your enumeration members, and this is very powerful to know what type of event this is. Keep in mind, this is all up to you. If you really didn't want to use the status type, you don't have to. This helps Drupal, not Drupal, but Google understand your events. It's really powerful when you think about that. Okay, I am almost done. I've just clicked, and what we're going to have is a bunch of content types. But we have these two from Drupal, and out of the box, I've set up mappings for them. So if I go to Manage Fields, similar to what you saw with the image, I can go to Article. It maps the schema.org article one-to-one, automatically works. And I've set up, well, alternate headline. Every single site I've built for articles, people are like, can we have another title? And this is a secondary title for creative work. Anything that's like an article falls under creative work. Article body maps to the body field. Author, well, we're not going to use, we have people on our site, so we're going to create our people as authors, and that's how it maps. If in this case, if that's not the way you want it, you can change it to be plain text. And it maps headline. I do have one problem here, and I'll show it to you, and we're going to fix it. Image. Image failed to map. We have an image field on our articles. The reason it failed to map is there's a little confusion. Core hasn't updated the article content type to use media image. It's created a file field. And that relationship, it's like, what relationship do you want to use? Well, I think we want to use media. So you have to manually fix this, which is fine. I would argue if I was coming in, I would, in article, delete image and put in media in Drupal. But let's not do that for now. And I actually can show you the next example. So we've taken article, we've taken control over that. It's part of schema. I'm going to go back up. I'm going to go to basic web page. I'm going to hit here. Basic web page. Well, it makes sense. It's a web page. And only 3 properties are mapped out of the box. They make sense. Created, modified, and description. And name the title. But the last 3, I really like showing these to people because they show how much thought the team at schema.org how much thought went into this at schema.org. So primary image of the page, that's exactly what we do on every one of our pages. And they decided not to call it image. They said, we got to be more specific. You got to say primary image of the page. Maybe there are images. By the way, image could have multiple images, but primary image of the page, I would recommend is one. And this is what Twitter should use. So that makes a ton of sense. And then the linkings pattern that they have is related and significant. And I've also seen this over and over again where you might want significant links in the right rail, like really important on the right-hand side or at the top of the page. At the bottom, you might want to have a carousel of related links. And I got to throw out, sticky doesn't work. It's kind of the wrong pattern. This is probably the right pattern to manage your links on your site. And yes, it maps the link field. It's unlimited. I just think it's beautiful. I think boom. This is really a web page. This is how everyone should just build a basic page. Okay, I'm pausing. I'm adjusting my headphones. I'm going to keep going. And now, okay, so we have a content architecture. I'm going to populate it. I'm going to go over to the devel generate module. I'm going to generate content. I'm going to check everything because everything's schema, so that's kind of cool. I'm going to do a little prefixing so we can get to, our different schema.org types. I'm creating 50 nodes. I go over here. We've got our data. And I admit, there's a leap of faith here. I just clicked buttons and didn't show you anything in the back end. I felt it was better to get things created in that. By the way, this is that 5-minute window, and then show you really what's happening here. And I'm going to use. Let's start from place. So you got a place content type. It automatically this is all configurable, but if you have the field group module, it will group your related properties together. Notice how I didn't change the label body because that's how core does it. Probably could change it, but you see media asset, grabs image, contact information, telephone number, place. So it automatically, it's interesting. It's hard. You can't think about 1,500 properties to set up default for. So what happens to properties that don't have a field group? They get put at the bottom in a field group based on the schema.org type. Place information, alternate name. We can tweak this. By the way, everything. If you see something off, this is where I want people to get involved. So let's go back up to our content types. Let's dive to event. I think event's a great one. So now we have our subtyping. So we could say this is a literary event. And since it's tied to taxonomy, we could see all literary events on our system. And now we have our people, our performers, our status, what's been moved online, our relationships. All of this is working out of the box for you. And this is Drupal. Nothing here is finite that you see. It's a starting point. you get a nice clean node edit form, but you could say you want tabs. You could change the labels. You could not do this. You get a very clean form. I'm going to give you a hint. You get all the descriptions from schema.org with the schema.org descriptions module. It really shows, I almost want to pause and say, it shows how awesome Drupal is, how much work people went in to set up all this stuff, all these field types and the cleanness and the gin theme working together. Here's the location as an entity reference. Ridiculously clean, simple. Wow, I spent way more time on this than any of my other demos, but I'm definitely happy with this recording so far. I am going to keep going. So there's optional modules, and these are the 3 that have been built out. The descriptions module literally just overlays schema.org descriptions on your schema.org types and properties. And the reason it exists is if you take the name or alternate name field and apply it to dozens of entity types, you don't really want the description copied over and over again. It's easier to leave it blank and then using config override to set those descriptions. And I want to emphasize, you can go in, enter a description, and you'll have a custom description. So JSON API and RDF is to start showing that what are pristine APIs looking like and what does SEO look like. JSON API extras, because it's using that module, basically takes the schema.org type and property mappings and applies them to JSON API resources to create APIs of just schema, of just what we're doing right now. Nothing else, because just the JSON API extras module handles a lot of great stuff. And RDF, which is in core, probably coming out of core, but it's a really good proof of concept of RDFA adds custom attributes to your entity types when they're viewed, and then search engines can pick that up. So I'm going to demo that, and this is not a 5 or probably 10-minute demo. This is actually fairly quick. Descriptions, the best example is if I go to add content, we know these are coming from Drupal, these first 2. The last 3 descriptions are being dynamically pulled from schema.org, from the database that we have. If you went to edit these content types, they would be blank for the description, and you can go and override it. Now, for JSON API, to demo that, we're going to start looking at what's going on an administrative level, which I'm going to continue forward with, but we're looking at the mapping types. All the work we just did is tracked here. I can even click show details, and we'll see all the properties we created and all the relationships right here. I'm going to hide details because we want to talk about JSON API. So I'm going to slow down and walk through some details. Out of the box, it does some configuration for you. It does go to look at, well, actually, I did this setting. I'm sorry. I want to not control other people's sites, but I went in and said, I don't want /JSON API on this site. I want it to be /API. I also recommend configuring that you only expose APIs when you explicitly override them and say, I want this to be public. It's a JSON API out of the box, exposes everything. It is really hard when you do that. You overwhelm people with information. You need to show people only what they need from an API perspective. Moving forward, so we have our schema.org stuff that's been added, but then we have image object, and let's go to event. And you can see we get this pristine API. It's using schema.org names. The properties that we created, the relationships we created, it's going over, you could see all the relationships, the image, which ones to get, what's the target ID, the reference, the includes are at the bottom. By the way, I was just being nice to people because JSON API has the ability, well, show me all the relationships, and in the URL, I'm passing the parameters to basically, in this demo, you see it's a massive packet, but now you get all your relationships, all the people, and you could see how clean this data is. And this is, by the way, it looks like gobbledygook only because we use the devel generate module. Think of this ridiculously clean data. I'm going to hit back. And the last one was RDF. And I don't think RDF is going to be the way we're going to do this in the community, but it's a good proof of concept, and it was very low code, very little code to do this. And you see how we have this start date. If I inspect this element, let's see if my inspector is working well. You see that HTML markup, it's time, semantic markup, which is great. And there's a property added to it, which is schema::start date. And way above, around the event node type, it says this is schema.org. This is where these fields map. And this is out of the box, just this quick demo is telling Google, here's the date of the event. And Google will parse this and understand it. As we move forward, there's lots more advanced opportunities to give Google more information, but this is a good starting point. I think I'm almost done with the demo. I don't know. We got a few more minutes here. What are the benefits of the schema.org module? What you just saw here, I want to emphasize, it's like standardization, standardizing everyone. That leads to simplification, simplifying how we do it, and acceleration. And I kind of have more detail. It makes things easier to understand, less thinking. Leveraging schema.org as an open, established standard makes it easier for organizations to create a content and information architecture that's simple for API consumers and search engines to understand. Everyone, even when you onboard new team members, they understand how your site works. And it's just simplification. It's simpler to build. Frankly, it's fewer resources. I've seen complex architectures where you have massive sites, the 100, 200,000 page sites, 32, 40 content types, take weeks to build. In this case, you have an information architect come in, figure out the relationships that they want to pull from schema, and you build it. Acceleration, I think this all leads to just, it's faster to implement, quicker to develop. Schema.org Blueprints module allows your organization's content information architecture to be built in a few clicks. Organizations can think less about their data structure and focus more on their content and user experience. Definitely hinting toward decoupled, because decoupled means you write your content and your front ends, when it's coupled, build amazing user experiences. And we stop thinking about it's really content's what's unique, not your data structure. So it's hard. I showed so much that I felt like I had to pause and talk about configuration, because I think that's real. You saw a lot of things happening, and the magic is around planning and having everything being customizable. So there's a schema.org mapping type, and they define what schema.org types, properties, and data types are mapped to which Drupal entity types, fields, and data types. So all that magic that you see as I'm creating, even that list of recommended types is customizable. Right now, we're targeting every sector, and it makes a lot of sense. If I'm demoing it, I want a hospital to feel comfortable, and I want an airline to feel comfortable, or an automotive industry. If you work in one specific industry, you would take those recommended types and hone them to your requirements within your organization. So then you're specifying the defaults for types, properties, even the subtyping. I explicitly said in configuration, I would like eventity types to have subtyping, nothing else. The default-based field mappings is how you saw me click once for the image object for media. I basically map those fields. It makes sense in media. There's a lot of default mappings we want. And when you saw those forms and the views, the field weights and groups, that's also configurable. And there are global settings. It makes a lot of sense that you might want to have global field type settings, like unlimited. It makes a lot of sense that not per entity type, if a field should be unlimited, it should be unlimited. If you have attendee, it's going to be attendees everywhere. It just doesn't really make sense that you'd have one. Maybe there's an exception which you have control over. Naming, that whole algorithm for naming things and abbreviating things is under your control. And the documentation that I talked about, the links and references. So we're going to demo it a little bit. I gave you this preview here, and I want to note I put schema.org at the bottom because it's affecting everything above it when it comes to structure. So this is mappings that are basically based on mapping types. And showing detail, that's why I added this feature, is it's massive. It's all the recommended types. When we talked about content, these types have default properties to push them forward. Well, this is the recommended types landing page. This shows that article maps to article and page maps to web page. These are all the types in configuration that I'm basically saying, yeah, for a TV series, I want this property. For recipe or occupation, I want that property. I think we're going to keep building this list out until it's massive. Keep in mind, nodes would have the most. It has the most base fields because it's the most complex. It maps only these 4 fields to multiple possible properties. I'll stick on this for a second. And then we have our groupings. So this would be the groups that are displayed. But When you get down to lower ones, you notice how paragraphs, I didn't spend a lot of time on this because there's only a few that are key right now. Contact point, nutrition information if you're building a recipe, postal address, location feature. And I want to emphasize, if I click edit, I'll use the first one because it's a better example. And by the way, this is too much. Hit edit. It's a fairly simple pattern of using a pipe to delineate values. So this is the name of the common recommended schema.org types in the groupings. If I go down here, key value pair mappings. So basically article. These are, the creative work gets these three properties when it starts. You're starting to see a pattern here. And you'll have to play around with this. Field groups, you have full control over that. You decide what properties go where. This sets the weight. This is, if you don't like the word information, you can change it, leave it blank. If you don't like details, you can change it to an HTML element or field set. It's bare minimum to get you started. If I hit back, go over to settings, these are global. It makes sense that for postal address, we'd want to use an address field or text. Keep in mind, the algorithm is smart enough. If there's a schema.org type existing somewhere on your site, it finds it and relates to postal address. But if you don't have a postal address paragraph object, it'll immediately do it. It also helps, with media, these are ridiculously clear that we want these to map to media, so it does it for us. If you didn't have media installed, it would do a link for those objects, if that's what's required. This is still under development. I can't emphasize, this is alpha. I didn't really state that from the beginning, but you start to, we're trying to figure out a lot of things. Field prefix, you can change it, but you can't do it after. It makes a lot of sense. Once you do pick a pattern, you got to stick to it. For properties, same thing. What types? Because we saw this is objects. If a property or field is looking for a postal address, we'll use these data types. If a property is article body, these are the recommended ones that you might want text long or text with summary. Names, full control over the algorithm. I have a big warning here because don't change it after you start using it, but you start seeing the patterns, health insurance, how to abbreviate it. What are acronyms on the site? These are, by the way, these are acronyms tied to schema. So I hope you don't have to configure it. That's the goal. JSON API, same thing. I didn't get into it, but this is how it says, I'm only exposing language code and status. If you have any other properties that are random, like Drupal's backend stuff, it doesn't come out in JSON API. It makes a huge difference. There's some path prefixing if there's conflicts, and in the requirement status report, I'm basically making sure you have JSON API configured correctly. I'm making a recommendation. Of course, if you don't like it, you can turn it off. Learned a lot over the years. References, all the pages that we're talking about. Article, here's a bunch of links, link and title, just the references, FAQ. We can grow this as a community. I think that's moving on to the next section. Oh, I got to give you a pro tip. All that configuration's in YAML. I personally find it a lot easier to do recommended types this way than long strings of text and figuring it out. It's up to you. This is a real pro tip. So I created a site in 5 minutes, clicking on these types. There's some extra ones here, but there's full Drush support. So in Drush, once you figure out your default settings, you can test them with ease. You can just say, create this type, create paragraph contact point, and in Drush, it'll generate it. And then you could do devel generate, and you can wireframe this stuff. And at the bottom, I'm including the delete schema.org types. Why would you do that? If you're prototyping, developing, figuring out what the right configuration is, this allows you to tear up, create and delete and start over and over again. These are best practices. I'm really trying to figure these out. The top one I've learned, you want to start with the most common properties as possible. Sometimes you'll get to a place in schema, and creative work sometimes will have an image and a photo as a property. And I recommend using image unless you can find a reason that you would need a separate photo. It's just easier. Also, then you have you're using the same image field over and over again. High-level types should be as general as possible. Keep them simple. We just want default properties that define an organization at that top level, like 5 or 6 key things. When you drill down and get to very more specific and important types like recipe, which is really, if you look at the hierarchy, recipes is a leaf at the end of a rich hierarchy. You should be as specific as needed at that point because you know you're creating a recipe. It's not going to do any inheritance. You need all that information. So next steps, wrapping up, people should try it, help improve it, and we need to get to a stable release. And trying is fair, people are familiar with this, but you got to throw it out there. Download, use Composer, Simply Test Me. We're still getting it working, but it will be shortly. And that's where you could spin this up. Improving it, this is really defining these schema.org types and properties. What's the default out of the box experience? That's going to require a lot of work. And what's the proper user experience? I think I'm close, but there's always room for improvement. Building out sector-specific content models, this idea, I have this dream. I'm going to pause on it and say that if this is done right, and I was an agency, and I'm a theoretical agency, and I had to go pitch a hospital, and I wanted to really sell them on this, and I had technologists in the room. People who aren't technical might not get it, but if I have technologists or people who author content, to be able to show them, I understand your data from day one, and be like, I want to be clear, I might even make a statement like, I've never built a hospital website. I'm learning as I go along. You guys are the experts, but we also know that Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Yandex have experts in this, and they want your data. And they've defined these amazing medical entities. And to show that in action, to show that understanding, and what you're really saying to these clients is, we understand you, and you can extend this, you can improve this, but we should get these content models right. So when we're targeting different sectors in our community, we can walk in the door and show something that no one's ever done, frankly. I've never seen a demo like that where a CMS is like, how do you want this? What do you do for a living? Okay, what's your business? You're a restaurant? Okay, here's a restaurant menu and recipes. And here's your schedule. And here's pristine hours that get out to Google. Sorry to rant for a second, but have to have a vision. And yeah, the integrating with JSON LD, I'm still working on. This is that's going to be the layer. That is a specification to share the data with Google. And that we're going to generate pristine JSON LD files or inline. And yeah, it's all leads to stabilizing the code base, test coverage. I just want to throw that out there as a thing. I like this image. It's cute. Alpha, beta, stable. I'm in dev. I haven't tagged an alpha because I don't want someone installing code and frankly, the dev release is like already better. Like, try it out. But the idea is we need to work on a plan. I need to get people to contribute. That's how we're going to get from alpha to beta. And when we're at beta, it's about sharing this. It's about getting this to work, getting people, really reinforcing that people are involved. It's a community effort, and then stable and release it. And who knows where we go from there. This is a little details. I mean, it kind of says a lot of what I pointed out. Yeah, I do beta. There's going to be some blog posts about this. Got people involved. What's the plan here? How is this going to be maintained? I'll give you a hint to say what you've seen here is what I think is needed, and that's it. There might be a finite point for this module, and I want to emphasize I didn't spend a lot of time on it. It's meant to be a blueprint to get you started. It doesn't build every detail of your house. Everything that happened that you saw, you can go in and tweak it afterwards. The only thing you can't tweak when you click on that button to say, I want a schema.org type, data types can't really change because the database table was created. And frankly, you should go back and change it. You got to make that one decision, and then there's all this flexibility that Drupal comes with. So there might be a final where we're just fixing bugs, and when Drupal moves forward, we'll just upgrade our API, we'll clean up our code and stuff like that. Listen, questions, you're not going to be able to ask me questions, but I want to leave you with the pros and cons. I think you're starting to see them. Structured data, standard naming conventions, incredibly well-defined relationships. And I'm willing to bet money that schema.org will be around for years and years to come. They have been around for a decade. Gradually, other schemas have been brought into schema.org. I think it's going to keep going. It's very vast right now as is. But there is a con. It's kind of like the opposite of all these things. It's just getting too complex for structured data. The naming convention, you are limited. You are buying into schema.org's naming convention, period. there's no point in arguing with it. If you need custom, frankly, if you need something's missing, you should go on schema.org and bring it up and help collaborate and fix it. Too many relationships, that can get a little rich. That can be challenging. We have to think those out. I haven't built out a massive site, but I have seen Power Graphs do a lot. And that's why it's required, because it's incredibly powerful to have little subcomponents that, capture data. And heck, we are tied to schema.org, but that's why this is called the schema.org first approach. I'll only caveat by saying you actually could go into that field prefix, change it to be called field _, build your site, and disable the module. The module will not uninstall your fields. So there is a way to decouple from schema.org if we need to. So I'm at the end of this. I really hope I made these arguments to you that, the schema.org blueprints module provides perfect data structures, pristine APIs, and great SEO. I don't think we can get any better SEO. Meta tags have only taken us so far, but to have schema.org data define the object on the page, and hopefully it'll define the object and all the related objects on the page so that Google understands everything about your site. It literally becomes a web of data. Thanks. Get involved. You can find me at Jay Rockowitz. The project's on Drupal.org. It's schema.org. Take care.